Appreciate everyone being here today. I'm super excited to share this with you. And Nathan is someone who I met really in the last few months. He reached out to me being like, hey, I think I would be a good guest for your podcast. And I was like, I think you probably would too. And I have heard your name before, and I've heard of Foundersuite before. So I think this will be awesome. And then that started off kind of just like more collaborations between each other. I love the work that they're doing at Foundersuite, just really in helping founders raise capital around by supporting the actual process of finding investors and reaching out to them and actually tracking your deal flow, which is so important. And so, on Startup Hypeman side, I think everyone in here knows me, but if you don't, what's up? My name is Raj, founder and chief pitch artist at Startup Hypeman. We focus on helping startups not suck at how they pitch themselves. And I think that's obviously a huge part of the equation. The other half of that equation is actually making sure you talk to investors. You could have a good, knocked over my water. You could make sure, or I guess you could have a good pitch, but if no one ever hears it, did you really, it's like if a tree falls in a forest, right? If you have a good pitch and no one hears it, did you ever really pitch? And so that's where Nathan comes in. He's got a ton of experience helping founders raise capital. His platform, Foundersuite, is literally designed to help engineer your deal flow process. And so today, what Nathan's going to share with everyone is his experience in hacking the fundraising process, specifically being able to build and nurture investor relationships at scale. I will turn it over to you, Nathan, to do your thing. And again, because unfortunately the chat is for whatever reason disabled, go ahead and just use the Q&A for your general chat. And then I will also be picking through that to figure out what are the actual questions you may have along the way. And I'll toss those in kind of as you see fit, Nathan.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share screen. And yeah, if people do have questions along the way, feel free to type them in. And Raj, if there's something really timely, feel free to just jump in. Otherwise, I'll kind of just ramble through this. And then we can have plenty of time at the end too. All right, can you see my screen okay? Yep.
All right, I'm on mute. Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Just making sure. Cool. Thanks so much for having me. This is always fun. Just very brief background on who I am. I run Foundersuite, like Raj mentioned. But before that, I spent almost close to 2 decades helping companies raise capital, first doing investment banking, helping them like startups raise later stage rounds of capital, IPO, Series B, Series D. And then I left JP Morgan in New York, came out to Silicon Valley and spent some time helping companies raise early stage rounds. And so this talk is kind of a lot of what I learned from like 2 decades of helping companies raise capital. Basically, ever since college, the only thing I've done is help companies raise capital. So hopefully I've got a few nuggets for you guys on how to do it right. And I'll just share, I always like to sort of start with my story. I launched Foundersuite like 6 years ago now. We're kind of old school by startup time frame. There's me launching it on stage at SF New Tech. It was a completely different product and UI, very cartoonish. And, this was my dream. I really wanted to start a startup. Like I'd been enjoying the investment banking, but I really just wanted to be a founder, not be a banker. And so I launched Foundersuite, saved up all my money, sent it to a development shop in Poland to help me build some product, then went out and started to talk to investors and basically got no one interested. And so then I went back and worked some more, consulted some more, saved up more money, sent more money to my development team in Poland, made a little more progress with the platform, got some more traction, tried again to go raise money. And again, no one was interested. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to try one more time. I'm going to spend another 6 months working on the product, saving my money, funneling to the development team in Poland. And then I'm going to try one more time to raise capital. This is my dream. This is my baby. And I'm going to leave no stone unturned. I'm going to talk to everyone I can. And if I still can't raise money, that's probably a sign the universe is giving me that this just isn't meant to be. But fortunately, third time's a charm. And I ended up raising raising our $1 million seed round, and the rest is kind of history. That gave us the fuel to get off the ground and really build a pretty nice business. So from that, I have some lessons. The two biggest takeaways is fundraising is a numbers game. You have to talk to a lot of investors to find the ones that are believers in what you're doing, and find the ones that are a good match. And somewhat corollary and conversely, fundraising is also a relationship game. Some founders will try one or the other of these. They'll build relationships with investors, but only with 10 investors, or they'll not build relationships and they'll try and do it totally as a numbers game and just blast 1,000 investors, and both of those often fail. It's really the combination of these two. It's a numbers game and a relationship game. So we're going to come back to that. And then kind of the summary, if we distill all this into one magic formula, the key to fundraising is building and nurturing relationships with highly targeted investors at scale. So we're going to kind of pick apart this formula today. So
Nate, let me just cut in for a quick second, only logistically. I figured out the chat feature thing. There was a toggle switch somewhere that was hiding. So everyone watching right now, the chat works now. You can all use the chat. So go ahead and use that as kind of like the running stream of consciousness, and use Q&A for actual questions now moving forward. Back to you.
I like it. It's funny. Zoom. All right. So how do we do this? Like, great theory, Nathan, great formula, but how do we actually do this? So step one is to actually be building the top of the funnel. Going back to that story of finally being able to raise money, I pitched over 200 investors in that third at bat, and ended up with 1 seed venture fund and 10 angels that came in and wrote me checks. If you do that math, that's about a 5% conversion rate between who I pitched and who wrote me a check. That also means I got rejected 95% of the time. And so what's the takeaway here? You really need a large target list of investors, to be able to successfully raise capital. A couple of places to do that. I won't make this too much of a product plug, but we do have a database in Foundersuite. We have about 212,000 investors, about 140,000 angels, and then the rest are venture capital, private equity, family offices, fund of funds, so on and so forth. And you can go in and search by type of investor, industry, location, or keyword. And most people come in, they'll do a search on their industry, like if they're fintech, kind of look at the results, click through their social links to do a little more digging on each investor, and then you can add them to your target list or pipeline by clicking that button on the right. So that's one resource. Check it out. Crunchbase is another great place to start building this target list. You can do searches on Crunchbase, of course, but the way I like to use Crunchbase is a little bit different. I actually will make a list of 10 companies that are similar to mine, but not directly competitive. Plug each one into Crunchbase, see who funded them at the relevant stage I'm at, and then add them to my list or my CRM. Like if I'm raising a seed round, eShares, which is now Carta's, kind of a quasi similar, but not really a competitor. I might add Draper Associates to my pipeline or my list. Lots of other places actually to be doing this list building and research. So this first bullet point, these are newsletters you can subscribe to. And basically when a startup raises capital, they'll announce it in these, or when a new venture fund has raised a new fund or a new venture fund is formed, they'll announce it in these newsletters. And it's great to see like who's getting funded, who's funding them, and what new funds are out there, because the best venture fund to be pitching is one that just raised a new fund. And these are free, so I spend 10 minutes a day kind of skimming these newsletters to see who's getting funded. And it's very easy. Conferences can be a good place to find investors, especially if you're in a niche or vertical like cannabis or blockchain or fintech or whatever. There's tons of conferences in those spaces. Go look at the speaking agendas, even going back a couple of years to see who the speakers were. And a lot of times investors will be on that list because they like to build their own brand by speaking at conferences. So that's a really highly targeted investor lead. Quora, TechCrunch, Medium, Twitter, you guys are all familiar with this, but Quora is kind of interesting. People put a lot of lists together, like top e-commerce and angels and stuff like that. Twitter is actually quite an interesting and active place to find investors. VCs in particular, are really, really active on Twitter. And so as you're doing this research in Foundersuite or Crunchbase, start to follow these investors. Twitter will recommend other investors to follow. And, you start to engage with them. Hopefully they will maybe recognize you later on when we reach out to them. PitchBook and CB Insights are paid databases, quite expensive, or $20,000 or so, but pretty rich data. Angelus has a database as well. I want to say it's about 35,000 or so investors. And then Signal, which is from a Israeli venture fund, has several thousand as well. So a couple different databases to search out there. And then the last point here, mining your personal network. I'm going to show you 2 ways to tap your own personal network to build your target list. Remember, we're still just on this phase of building a target list of investors. Let's not go there. Sorry. So let's start with LinkedIn. And this is my LinkedIn page. This is my homepage. I do have a paid plan, but you don't need a paid plan. What I'm going to do, let's say I'm raising a seed round. Come up and do a search on angel investor. And then, okay, that's 90,000 results. That's really too many results. It's probably like most angel investors in LinkedIn. So what I want to do next is apply a couple filters. I might apply a first degree connection filter just to remind myself who I'm actually connected to. But the real hack here is to do a second degree. And then let me just add a location like, you're in Chicago, right, Reg? Where are you at?
Yeah, I'm Chicago.
Yeah, okay. Just for kicks, I'm going to do Chicago. So actually, there was a greater Chicago. All right, that's good enough. So let's see what results I get here. Okay, 190 results. So much more manageable, right? 90,000 down to 190 results. This means that there are 190 people that call themselves angel investor in their title that are in Chicago. Let's say I'm based in Chicago, that I have at least one mutual connection to. So theoretically, I should be able to get in touch with all 190 of these people. That doesn't mean all 190 are relevant for my type of business. My business, Foundersuite, is SaaS, FinTech, SMB. So I'm really looking, I'm going to go through this list and I'm looking for clues that these angel investors either invest in my type of business or they don't invest in my type of business, right? I'm just looking for any signals. So what I do next is right click or command click each one, and I might open up, 10 at a time. We'll just open up like 4 here just for kicks. And then I'm just going through, I'm just going through very quickly. I'm looking again for clues. Does Matthew do my type of deal? Matthew doesn't have a lot of information here. Crypto, FinTech. Okay, FinTech is a clue, but most of this other stuff like crypto, we're not doing that, right? So that's not relevant to us. He doesn't have a ton of information about what he specifically invests in. A lot of people will list out their portfolio. Nothing really jumps out at Matthew. So Command W will close that window and I move on to Nina. Okay, she's at Corazon Capital. I've heard of them. I'd probably click through to look at Corazon's portfolio to see if that looks relevant. I know Souza, I've heard of them. So again, she doesn't really list exactly what she's looking for here, but I might do a little more research on her to see if it looks like she's doing FinTech SaaS. Let's just move on to Furhat. Okay, so this is interesting. So CRM immediately jumps out. We have a product called Investor CRM. So at the very minimum, it might be interesting to talk to him if he's pretty familiar with CRM. And show him what we've got. He also does business planning. So this guy looks kind of interesting. And he's an angel investor with Chicago House. So I would probably add Furhat to my CRM or my list, whatever I'm using to, collect all these investors. I'm adding Farhat to my CRM, and then I'm also going to click through here and figure out which of these two gentlemen, or no, sorry, which of these two people I know the best. Who do I want to be asking for the intro to Farhat? And I would also add, Burak to my CRM as the person that I call the connector to Farhat. Does that make sense? So you repeat this process, same thing, go through Michael. I'm not going to go through all these people, but future of work, education, so that's really useful clues there. I might click through to his portfolio too, but you repeat this process. I could go through all 190 people in Chicago in a couple hours, basically, and probably pick out 20 to 30 good investor leads by repeating this process. So that's how to use LinkedIn.
If I can add a note or two here,
Yeah,
on the LinkedIn
please go for it.
process, which I think is so smart the way you're doing it. If you don't, and you do, but for anyone on this, if you don't have a Sales Navigator account, like I know it says Sales Navigator, but I mean, you probably would need that anyways at some point for your sales efforts, but it's just as helpful for figuring out who your investors are, because some of those filters that Nathan showed aren't available to you unless you've got a Sales Navigator account. And it just allows you to like hyper drill down into who you want to go after, and who's going to fit your profile. And I think the other thing too, you can look at is, if they aren't maybe saying explicitly on their profile, anytime you click on someone's profile, you can see what their activity is. So like, what kind of posts are they engaging with? That may give you a hint towards what kind of investor or what type of investments they make. And I just want to underscore how important this part of the process is, because the investors I know often say they get a absurdly high amount of emails from people who want to meet with them who don't fit their criteria whatsoever. They'll be like, yes, we literally only invest in, I don't know, in B2B SaaS. And then I've got this consumer wearable product company reaching out to me. Like, don't shoot yourself in the foot by wasting your own time, but then potentially giving yourself a bad reputation simply by not doing research up front.
I can't emphasize that enough, and we're going to talk about that some more. That's super critical, and you're absolutely right. That's like one of the top 5 mistakes that founders make, especially when they fail to raise money, is they haven't done that targeting like we just talked about. Just on the Sales Navigator subscription, I know now LinkedIn may have changed this. I used to do this demo before I had a Sales Navigator. I know you could filter by like secondary connection and location. Now, I think some of this other stuff is on the paid, Sales Navigator plan, but like you can do a lot of this on the free plan on LinkedIn, and they may have changed it. But yeah, good points. Okay, so that's how to use LinkedIn to identify some good leads. I'm going to show you one other method I did, and this is just an old demo account or an old account, but this it's not so much about the product but about the methodology here. This is my investor pipeline. This is a super messy pipeline, but the real tactic here is this column. So when I was building up my pipeline or my list of investors, I made a column for one of my advisors. His name is Steve Bennett. He's a real guy. He's a professor of entrepreneurship. He's a fractional CFO, lots of different companies. He's kind of been around forever, knows lots of people. And so in my CRM, and this method works no matter what CRM you're using, but I made him a column and I invited him into my account. I said, hey, Steve, I'm building out my investor list. I've made you a column. Could you populate your column with some investor names that you'd be willing to introduce me to? And he did. He added, 10, 12 folks to his column. I repeated this process with 5 or 6 other advisors of mine and was able to generate like 60 or so really good leads, really good warm intro leads by having a structured way of asking my advisors and mentors and even previous investors, if you have angel investors, structured way of asking them to open up their network and help you populate your pipeline or list. So much more effective. I guess the key point here is much more effective. If I just called up and said, Steve, hey, I'm raising money. Do you know any investors? He might have a name or two for me, but when I have this structured way of asking them to help me populate my pipeline, it really got, a lot more intros that way. Okay, so just keeping moving here. This is a lot of work. You got to go to a lot of different places. There really isn't any single, even with our database of 212,000 investors, we really don't have it all. You kind of have to go a couple different places here. And going back to our magic formula, key to fundraising, building and nurturing relationships with highly targeted investors at scale. Going back to that thing, this is a numbers game. For most pre-seed, seed, early stage startups, I say you need a minimum of 200 investor names on that list. And frankly, in this market, which is getting tougher, I'd say that's more like 300, maybe even 400. So there's the scale part. Okay, moving on. This ties in exactly what Roger's saying. Now that we've built this list, we actually want to filter and qualify this list. If we think about fundraising as a sales process, good salespeople actually spend a ton of time qualifying their leads, ranking their leads, prioritizing their leads, so that they're spending their time pursuing really high quality fits for what they're selling. Same thing with raising capital. Anyone who's invested in a competitor, cross them off your list. If they're ethical, they won't want to talk to you. If they're unethical, they'll send your pitch deck to your competitor. I've seen it happen dozens of times. No dry powder. So if a venture fund has not raised a new fund in the last couple of years, they're probably only doing follow-on deals to their existing portfolio companies. So you still might talk to them, maybe get some pitch practice with them, but it's easy to waste a lot of time pitching venture funds that don't have a fresh fund to work with. Same with angel investors. If you look at someone's portfolio on Angel List and it's all from like 5 years ago, they're probably taking a break. Wrong sector, wrong stage, wrong geographic location. This is exactly what Roger said. If you're a fintech investor, you don't want to reach out to a medical device. I'm sorry, if you're a fintech startup, you don't want to reach out to a medical devices investor and vice versa. That should be so obvious. A lot of people skip that. Stage is a little more nuanced. If you're raising a seed round and you see an investor that calls himself a growth capital, that sounds good, right? No, that actually means later stage growth capital. So you'll kind of tune into the definitions here. And then geographic location. Some investors are very specific about where they want to invest in. That could be a function of where they got their money from, right? They might have University of Chicago LP investors, so they're trying to do Chicago area deals only. But geographic location has become a lot less important in the past couple of years, especially with COVID and everything. So even if you're based in a non tech hub, you can still kind of hunt around. But some investors are specific about that. Anyway, and then bad reputation. This is a little more fuzzy, but very important, because you're going to be spending the next several years of your life working with these investors. If they have board seats, they can fire you, right? They kind of become your boss. And so you want to be choosing investors that you have a good rapport with and that have a good reputation. A couple different places to kind of source that, not only doing diligence on the investors. We've added something in our database where founders can leave reviews on investors, and kind of like a Yelp for VCs in a way. Our data set's still pretty small, but people are starting to add that stuff. So we're trying to capture some of that. Anyway,
awesome. That you've added.
Yeah, no, it's cool. It's funny what people say too. Every now and then we'll get a review that's just like, oh my God, this is like the most scathing thing I've ever heard. And then I'm like, do we publish this or not? Right? Because I don't want to get sued. But it's
a couple points I want to add
work
here, especially on the bad reputation thing.
Yeah, please go.
I had a friend a few 3 or 4 years ago who would raise money, and then within like a year, the investor all of a sudden basically like demanded their money back plus like interest on top of it. Or I don't remember the specifics of it, but it was a messy situation that involved expensive legal fees. And I remember my friend being like, I mean, we should have never taken this person's money in the first place.
Well, I can tell you many stories like that. Like because I was consulting for 10 years to startups, and I mean, just picture this scenario. I'm thinking of one guy in particular who saved 200, all his money, 250 grand to start his startup, and put his career on, he quit his career basically to start this, put in a couple of years of work, was able to get a seed round going, then another round going, Series A. And by that time, he had basically lost control of the board, and didn't have over 50% of the stock either. And then things didn't go quite as didn't grow quite as fast as possible, and he got canned. So imagine sinking your entire life into this company and then getting booted from your company. That happens, and sometimes it is the founder's fault, right? I mean, investors do have a fiduciary duty to their investors, so it's not always just bad investor. But it's like there's a lot of horror stories around that.
Yeah.
We could have a whole.
Which is why I think on the founder side, it's like you got to do like your own due diligence of them as well, not just them do due diligence of you.
You find in startups that I wouldn't do this right up front in this top of the funnel thing, but as you're getting into discussions with these investors, reach out to founders they've invested in. If you can, Google around, find a startup that they invested in that failed. The questions you want to be asking both current, active startups and failed startups is like, what was it like working with investor XYZ when things got bumpy, when things went south or didn't work out as planned, right? Were they, how did they react? Like that's always the telltale signs, right? So
I got another question for you. You mentioned before with like potentially wrong state, like you're like, oh, growth capital, actually what it means is a scale stage company, not an early stage company. Are there other like common keywords that you've observed get misunderstood?
Keywords not so much, but a lot of times you'll have a $500 million fund or $800 million fund that has a seed arm that does a little bit of seed investing. They're really not a early stage fund, but they'll have that out there just to have their kind of toe in the water in case there's any great deals. So they have a seat at the table. For what they really focus on is the scale stage stuff, so sometimes that's confusing too, right? Like, oh, this mega fund has a seed team, but so that can be misleading. And there's also signaling risk if they don't, go on to lead your Series A, Series B.
Sure.
In terms of actual words, I can't think of too many others that are like confusing. Pre-seed and seed, those are sort of a little confusing. People, different investors define seed differently, right? Some people kind of call it pre-revenue. Others, that's pre-seed. So there's a little ambiguity around that sometimes. So
we've got a audience question. Do you want me to ask it now or hold off?
Yeah, either one. Go for it. Why not?
So Ted asked, he said, I'd like to vet my investors with other founders, but why would a founder confide bad investor stories in me if they risk raising the ire of their investor?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, if you did find a startup that investor invested in that has already failed, that investor or that founder is probably a lot more open to being full disclosure on that. I feel like founders are very, very open with other founders, right? There's a camaraderie amongst founders, and there's a great blog post from Steve Blank from several years ago called "Your Investor is Not Your Friend." And it's sort of true. I mean, you can be very friendly with an investor, but again, they're not truly your friend. They have their own duties. And so I feel like founders are actually pretty good about like helping the founders, especially if you have a rapport with that founder, whether you're in the same location, maybe you go out for, coffee or drinks or buy them lunch or something like that. I have never really experienced founders being super cagey about that. Like if you're a trustworthy type of person.
Yeah. I think that's pretty spot on. I think the average founder, if they have a bad experience, they want to protect someone else from having that experience. And they also probably trust Ted, like they probably trust that you wouldn't then go to that investor and be like, I'm turning you down because this person specifically told me you're bad to work with.
Yeah,
I think they
exactly.
trust that you would probably be more generic in your responses to that investor at that point.
Yep, I agree. All right, I'm going to move us forward a little bit because there's still a decent amount of stuff to talk about. As a general rule of thumb, if we built a general rule of thumb, I say remove about 25 to 30% of your starting list, right? And so that what remains on your list after doing this process is a really highly focused, highly targeted list. This is going to make your fundraising go much faster, more efficiently, less painful if you ended up with a really highly targeted list of investors that do your industry, your stage, your geographic location. They don't have a competitor and all these other criteria. So don't skip this step, as a lot of people do. All right. Oop. Oh no. Sorry. What's going on? Okay. Still learning how to use computers. Okay. So going back to the magic formula, just to emphasize this, Raj said it a few minutes ago. I just said it again. Key to fundraising is building highly targeted investors. All right. So next step, we're just going to try and find our best mutual connection to each one who remains on our list. This is a lot of LinkedIn lookups here, putting in, Tim Draper in there, seeing if you have any mutual connections. If you have multiple mutual connections, obviously pick the kind of highest, the person who knows you the best and can vouch for what you're doing. But ideally, if that person is also maybe a co-investor with Tim, or maybe someone that Tim's done deals with in the past, that's always good too. If you don't have any mutual connections to your target investors, what do you do? Common question. We go back to leveraging the founder camaraderie. Reach out to 3 or 4 founders that Tim's invested in over the past, call it 12 months. Cold email, and just be very casual. Like, hey, I've seen Tim's put some money into you. This is what I'm doing. I'd love to, hop on a Zoom with you and just chat about what Tim's been like to work with. Is he helpful? I've also seen founders kind of approach it like, hey, we're in the same space. I'd love to get your feedback on our deck and stuff like that. But basically reaching out to founders, and you get a dialogue going with the founder, then it's okay to ask for that intro to Tim, right? Founders, again, are pretty good about helping other founders. And conversely, Tim spent 3 to 6 months getting to know that founder, went through due diligence on that founder. There's a high level of trust between Tim and that founder. So really good way of networking your way into a warm intro. We have a podcast called How I Raised It, and we've interviewed 240 founders so far on how they raised capital. Roger's coming on the show pretty soon. And of the 240 founders, all successfully funded, some of them, unicorns, decacorns, probably 80% did this approach of reaching, and some of them had the advantage where they might have been in Y Combinator, so they had like a established alumni network, but many of them weren't. And they did this approach of building out their network, getting intros to investors by, socializing and networking with founders. So it can be really, really effective. It does take time, but that's how it goes.
It's funny to me how similar like strategies are across different like use cases. And what I mean by that is many years ago, I was actually doing like career coaching for people. And one of the strategies I would tell people about when they were like, oh, I want to work at that company, they have an opening. And I'd be like, well, don't just apply through their like online portal because it's probably going to nowhere. And then they were like, okay, well, I want to reach out to the person and ask for an introduction to the hiring manager. And I was like, well, don't do that either. And similar to this, I would say, find someone on LinkedIn who either has that position now or got promoted and used to have that position, and just send them a message being like, I'm considering applying for this company, but before I do, I just wanted to know, I wanted to hear from you, like what your experience has been like working there.
Yeah.
You have 15 minutes to chat. And then if that conversation goes well, then at the end, if you built rapport, then you're like, hey, this actually does seem like a great company for me. What do you recommend would be the best way to apply for the job? And then most likely in that situation, that person's gonna be like, oh, give me your resume. I'll give it to so-and-so. And same thing, I feel like here, it's like you have this conversation and it's like, hey, what do you recommend would be the best way to get in touch with them? And then they'll be like, oh, I'll make an email intro for you.
Absolutely. And if you make them look good, because if you're impressive, let me put it this way, if you're impressive, you got something cool going on and they're making an intro, that makes them look good in the eyes of their investor, right? And they'll organically often offer to make that intro, right? And conversely, if your pitch isn't very good, they're going to be a little more hesitant to make that intro, right? Yeah. All right. Okay, so let's keep moving here. Won't make this too much, but you've got 300 investors on this, or 200 investors on this list after doing your qualification. You need some way of organizing this. My other little product placement, load them all up into Foundersuite. Really good way to keep organized and just stay on top of hundreds of tasks. Every time you talk to an investor, it's going to lead to 2 or 3 follow-up tasks or action items that have to happen. And so you're talking literally thousands of actions and to-dos when running a fundraise. You can't manage this on sticky notes. You can't manage it on a Word doc or whatever you're using. So you need some way. Even spreadsheets. I used to build these beautiful spreadsheets for startups. Spreadsheet is fine for the first week or 2, then it becomes unmanageable. So there's my shameless plug for Foundersuite. But even if you don't use Foundersuite, I strongly believe you need some system of keeping on track. And the reason is fundraising, there's a direct correlation between like tempo and speed of fundraising and the likelihood of getting a check at the end. If your fundraising is sloppy, if things are not running in a really fast, efficient manner, the thing's going to get stale and die. And conversely, if you're running a really tight fundraise, things are moving quickly, you're never the bottleneck. You never want to be the bottleneck of things. Things are happening fast. Then, deals develop some heat and momentum, and you're likely to get funded, raise capital. So get a system in place to be able to manage all this. Hopefully it's Foundersuite. Maybe it's something else. I'm not going to go over this because Raj is the expert on this, but just make sure your pitch. I'd say in the top 5 reasons why startups don't get funded or fail to fundraise, a crappy pitch is probably number 1. And, I see it constantly. Raj, I'm sure you've seen a million bad pitches, but like, make sure your pitch is absolutely crushing it before you get out there talking to investors. You don't get a second shot. You don't get to come back 2 months later and say, oh, I've reworked my pitch. Can I pitch you again? Doesn't happen like that. You need to go out the door, absolutely crushing it. And one little hack there, let's say you built that list of investors, maybe start your fundraise with sort of your tier 3 investors. So you get a lot of pitch reps in before you talk to your dream investors, right? Just a little hack. And also leverage other founders, right? That same tactic of reaching out to founders. Sometimes it might be just advice on a certain investor, but you could also say, could I just get 10 minutes to walk you through my pitch deck and get just your gut impression? Founders are often pretty good about that if you're not asking for too much time. So get some feedback from other founders. Also nice to have a little financial model just showing how you're going to spend the money. Raj, you could go on for hours about pitch deck, but anything else to just quickly add on that?
I think the main thing, aside from those, is like, in that same respect, like, don't start working on your pitch when you already need to start raising capital. Like, have your pitch figured out before you need to go out and actively fundraise. So you're not, what do they say, building the airplane while you're flying it. And that way you also, you've been able to practice it before you're in a live scenario. You've been able to tweak it appropriately, right? You want to be crisp by the time you need to actually be doing it for the purpose of raising capital. And so, sometimes we'll get founders who are like, I need to raise in the next 30 days. And we'll be like, well, sorry, we can't work with you.
Right. It takes time to build the deck, and it takes time to hone and tweak that deck so it is a masterpiece before going out. All right. I'm going to go through some of this kind of quick, but this is a sample email. When you've done the research on, I think it was step 3 of mapping all your connection paths to investors, you might find a couple people who are super connectors. This is simply an email asking them if they are willing to make an intro to people you've identified that they're connected to. And that way, this is a real guy, Jeff Thomas, who made a bunch of intros for me. He can just respond like, I know Tom, I know Jessica, I know Mamoon, I know Wesley, I don't know the other people. Happy to intro those 4 to you, right? For each one he says, yes, I'm happy to intro you. I create a new email thread. And just a couple of points I want to emphasize here. First of all, this is the intro request email. First of all, notice how short this is. It is not a 8 paragraphs of your entire company history with a 45 megabyte PowerPoint attached. It is super short, super crisp. Subject line, very important. Jeff, can you introduce me to target investor? And then we had, then what are we doing? Seed round, we had a lead investor, we had 2/3 of the round committed. Obviously, we didn't start with that. So whatever is the most exciting, sexy part about your business, it could be existing investors, it could be a strategic partnership, it could be month-over-month growth. Put that in the subject line because these investors are getting hundreds of these emails. Then the body. Jeff, good chatting with you. As mentioned, I'm raising a seed round. Here's what we do. We make an investor management reporting platform. Here's a link to our website. And then the ask, could you introduce me to target investor? Then kind of the why, because he does fintech SaaS. And then I noticed this investor went to the same very small college in Iowa that my dad went to. So I put that in there. And then I include a link to our deck. And this is not our full deck. This is what I call a teaser deck. It's basically 5 slides. So problem, solution, market, traction, team. Problem, solution, market, traction, team, right? And that's basically all the investor needs to make a kind of a, yes, I'll take the intro, or no, not a fit. It's enough to tell them what we're doing, kind of where we're at and stage of the business, who we are, and kind of our big vision there. And that's good. And I actually like investors who say, this is just not a fit, it's too early, rather than taking the time to set up a meeting or drive down there. I like to use this as a way to qualify these investors. And if he does want to take a meeting, I can then look in our, in Foundersuite, of course, because we have a pitch deck hosting product, but I can go in and see how much time did the investor look at the deck? Was it 1 minute, 10 minutes? And then when I actually meet with him, I can kind of tailor my pitch around that a little bit. If he didn't look at the deck at all, I know I need to kind of start from scratch. And then my connector, Jeff in this case, can simply click forward. Hey, Clint, Nathan's a friend of mine. Do you want to take this intro? Send. Hey, Jessica, Nathan's a friend of mine. Do you want to take this intro? Send. I'm making it easy for my connector to do his or her job. Very easy, very important. Otherwise, this will get bogged down if you're asking too much of your connectors. All right, so now kind of like I like to say, the curtain's open, the game is on here. I guess I'm mixing metaphors there, but anyway, if you haven't watched it, go watch season 1 of HBO Silicon Valley. It's really funny. It's a few years old now, but it's still really good. It follows this fictional startup called Pied Piper. The CEO, Richard, is in the middle image there. And he's an introvert. He's an engineer. All he wants to do is write compression algorithms, but he's got to get out there and meet all these investors who are really smart. 40% of all VCs went to Stanford or Harvard. That's a real stat. Many big egos involved. And investing is what they do, all day long, day in and day out. Whereas for Richard, it's his first time doing it. So there's kind of an automatic, disparity there. The only way to really compensate there is to treat it like a game. Channel your inner hustler, even if it's not natural to you, and have fun doing it. Couple hustle tips. Doing the intros in parallel, asking your connectors to make those intros all around the same time frame. We call that the blitzkrieg approach. And really what we're trying to do is get momentum going for your deal. Deals run on momentum. If you remember nothing else from this talk, burn it in your brain. My job as CEO is to get momentum going for my deal. Investors can, like, they have a sixth sense about whether a deal has momentum or whether it does not have momentum, or worse, whether it has gotten stale. And every time you meet with an investor, they'll ask you questions like, so how's the round coming together? That's a way of probing, does this thing have momentum or not? And you want to be able to answer that with some response like, it's coming pretty good. We just started fundraising about a week ago. I've got 10 pitch meetings this week. I've got 12 next week. We're running a pretty efficient process. I'm really trying to close this round out by Labor Day. And, running an efficient process using Foundersuite, of course. And, I'm pretty excited about our prospects here. And then, of course, as you get further along in your fundraise, you can replace 10 meetings with, we're in diligence with four investors. I'm expecting 2 term sheets next Monday. You can drop whatever signals of interest there are from other investors without exaggerating or lying. And you'll see it, the momentum kind of just, picks up if you're doing this and running it fast. Your pitch should be getting better and better. One little hack, I guess, is bring your co-founder or someone to the first couple pitch meetings just to write down all the questions the investor asks, and then go back and make appendix slides for those. Also, if you're constantly or continually getting stuck on a certain pitch slide, like your marketing or go-to-market slide, go back and work that, right? Your deck should be getting better and better as you make progress. And of course, as you're getting momentum and your story and deck are getting better, these things kind of reinforce each other. On the process there, don't ever exaggerate or lie that you have interest that you don't have, but you want to kind of play off. Investors are driven by FOMO a lot, like it's a real thing. And so you want to kind of signal that other investors are interested and generate that. And then my favorite tactic of all is to send a regular company update to everyone who is in your pipeline. Everyone who has not told you no should be getting a fairly regular company update from you. And I'll just show you an example of what a nice, simple, clean one looks like. I think this one. But I'll zoom in a little bit. So this is just a sample one, but this is all it has to be. So a little bit about what you do, right? Just kind of remind people on your distribution list what you're doing. Short and sweet. Key wins. What happened last month or last 2 months? That is exciting. It could be product stuff. It could be press. It could be growth. Whatever it is. A little bit on your metrics. Put in maybe a product shot, right? Even if you're software, even if you're doing something kind of not glamorous or a little bit boring, put in a product of your, or image of your product, and then put in what you're doing next. So what's coming up next month, next quarter that you're excited about. Could be partnership deals, it could be a product release or whatever. And then put in a team shot of your team every single time. Could be you guys in the lab if you're doing something scientific or technical, make it kind of company specific, but that's all it has to be. What you're doing, progress you're making, your metrics, your product, what you're doing next, and then your team. And if you repeat this cycle a couple times, it's a really good, think of it like marketing 101, a really good way for investors to get to know you over a period of time. So I really recommend founders, if you can start this process even 6 months before you plan to raise money. Not many founders do it. Kind of like Raj says, a lot of people say, I need to raise money in the next 30 days. Well, you're a little late, but still, if you can start this process early, I have seen startups using our platform that do this, and they will send out, like, let's say you're raising money in January of 2023, start doing this process now, send out, July, August, September, October, November, and then in the December update, they put a little thing in there. We're going to kick off our fundraise next month. And I've seen deals get swooped up before they even go out on the market, so to speak, by investors who've been following a startup's progress. So really effective way of marketing your deal. But even while you're fundraising, you should be sending out a company update.
Can I
All
add
right.
something here, Nathan?
Yeah, please go for it. Please.
Can you pull up that the email again, the email template again?
For asking for the intro, or which one?
It was the investor update one.
Oh, yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
So first off, I actually didn't even know Foundersuite did this too, which is just badass. That because I think most people are just like manually typing in Gmail every time. So it's cool just to have like a template you can repeat each time through. You talked about like the KPI, like dropping your KPIs in there. And one thing I want to make sure everyone like you really understand is because when we build pitches, like this is the strategy we deploy. And I think it makes sense in the pitch, but then also in these updates as well, is like, know what is your like number one success metric that you're focused on, and show people how you're tracking against that metric. Like, don't get caught up in needing to share every possible metric that could exist, especially companies that are like, oh, we're still pre-revenue, but like, okay, where else are you gaining traction if you're still pre-revenue? Don't make people focus on the thing that is not your strong suit yet. Redirect their focus to the category of the metric category that you're focused on, to make them care about that and see that, hey, they're making a lot of progress against this thing. Clearly they're building momentum.
Absolutely. And that becomes a fundable story, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that is sort of related that, I tell founders, like, put yourselves in the shoes of an investor. And I'm thinking, or I'm talking to dozens, maybe even sometimes in some cases, hundreds of founders. And if there's someone that's out there that is consistently, telling me what they're going to do, then coming back a month later and executing, and they've done it, right? And they've maybe they said that they were going to get 6 new enterprise customers, and they came back and got 8, and their metrics are, increasing and improving every time. Like that's someone I want to back, right? That's a deal I want to put money into. Like, you're showing me this pattern of execution and success, even if it's early stage, right? That's what's interesting to investors. So you want to kind of fit that profile.
We've got a couple minutes left. I'm good to go a couple minutes overtime if you are, and for everyone attending, if you have to drop, we understand, but if you can stay on and through the rest of this, we've also got a couple of questions we're going to make sure we answer. I'll let you go uninterrupted here to the finish here.
Let me blaze through the next few things. I'll kind of skip ahead a bit. So hustle your butt off. And, we kind of just talked about this, but part of our magic formula is nurturing these relationships. The investor update is a great way to nurture it. This is from Mark Suster. The first time we met, and then when the investor invests, it's after multiple touch points. These touch points can be coffee meetings. They can be your investor update sent by Gmail. It can be your investor update sent through Foundersuite. It's multiple touch points. So think about that. I'm going to skip over this. It's basically just, think about angel groups and stuff like that. Skip over this. This is basically a summary of, if you don't have a lead investor, create a party round. And I can send you these slides if you want to study this. I want to spend a minute on this, and then let's do Q&A. But you've been fundraising for 3 months now. You want to get back to business. You want to try and close the round out. So every time you have a pitch meeting, make sure you actually ask the investor for their interest level, and a sample little sample quote would be like this: like, thank you so much for meeting me today, Raj. I really appreciate your time. I'd love to hear what next steps are, and what your interest level is, and what your typical check size is. And then just shut up. And hopefully, Raj comes back with like, well, we typically invest 50K. Our next step is we'll talk about it at our partner meeting on Monday, and I'll get back to you. But if his response includes a next step, like, I want you to come in and meet my partners, that's a really good buying signal. Second point here, make them actually pitch you a little bit. So again, kind of say something like, really appreciate your time and letting me share my vision for Foundersuite. I would love to hear how you help your portfolio companies in general, and how you would help me build Foundersuite. And you're making them pitch you a little bit. And the reason this is effective is every investor that has been doing it for a while has lost out on competitive deals where there are more investors trying to get in. So you're actually signaling a little bit that they might have to actually compete to get into your deal. And especially as your momentum picks up, that really becomes, it's like the piranha feeding frenzy with investors. Takes multiple meetings before you get a term sheet. 80% of your time is to get that first term sheet, then it's pretty easy to fill it out. Easy to get a no, or sorry, it's hard to get a no. A lot of investors will ghost you. I'm just going to skip over the rest of this, but then this last point, if you're going to go raise money, don't stop until the money is actually in your bank account. How do you know when an investor says yes? When their check clears. Everything up to that point, term sheets is just a conditional yes or a maybe. So if you're going to do it, get it over the finish line. Skip over this, but this is just the start. Fundraising is not the finish line, it's just the start. We have, if you do want to use Foundersuite, we've got some like sweet discount codes on that. And then the last thing I'll just mention is this podcast I mentioned of our own, which Roger's going to be on, which is called How I Raised It. And lots of just really good insights on how to raise capital. So let's do some Q&A. Do you want to curate, Roger? I guess.
Yeah. So Ted asked, and he said it might be too specific of a question, so you can kind of direct as appropriate. But he said, I'm trying to raise a 12.5 million pre-revenue round for my B2B SaaS company. 8 months ago, I was told this would be a reasonable ask. With markets as they are, what are the trends around typical pre-revenue rounds? Or are they so specific to that startup's specific proposition that this is an unanswerable question?
Markets have gotten way harder. Even, I think the funding peak was in like November. I could be a little bit off on this, but I feel like the funding peak over the last decades was like November of 2021, and things were still pretty strong up until, call it March. And things have now gone off a cliff, and venture funding's down. Venture funding's down like 25%, and valuations have like been halved. So, you still might be able to raise that amount, but your valuation, what you're gonna have to give up in equity is now significantly more, lower valuation, more equity. Now, pre-revenue, it really does depend on a lot of other factors. If you don't have revenue, obviously you better have like compensating factors like an amazing team, really big market, really unique product that's gonna blow their doors off in a demo, stuff like that. Without some compensating factors, it might be hard, but deals happen all the time. It kind of depends on the other factors.
Yeah, yesterday I just recorded a podcast that's going to go live in about a month with Naveen Goyal, who's the CEO of Loud Capital. And we were literally, the title of the episode is A VC's Take on Impending Recession. And he has a pretty optimistic lens, but he was like, look, like meetings aren't stopping. Like it's everyone's job to still invest money. The meetings aren't going to stop. Deal flow might slow down, but the meetings are still happening. People still want to know what should they be on top of, either to write you a check today for maybe a lower valuation, or on the founder side, you can start lining up people and decide when you want to take that money in as you start to observe market trends. And maybe you get, you wait it out a little bit and get a higher valuation, but don't pause taking meetings because other people will just get ahead of you if you do.
Exactly. Yep.
Len asked, how do you handle the investment lead question when you were trying to get them to be the lead? And how do you manage that when you have multiple VCs that do lead? How and when do you ask them to lead?
Yeah, that's a good question. The harder part is usually finding a lead. Actually, there's a lot of investors that want to co-invest once you find a lead. And this is one of the frustrating parts is like, okay, I need a lead. I've got all these co-investors that are waiting for me to find a lead. If you have multiple people who want to lead, that's a nice place to be in. I think that's really where it comes down to personal chemistry, fit. It's not even always about like the best valuation. I know a lot of founders who have taken maybe slightly less valuation, but from a lead that has a great brand that's been, that they had a great chemistry with. And I would sort of optimize for that, right? Who's going to help you build this business, not just get the better terms. And at some point you just have to kind of go with your gut if you have multiple lead options. But sometimes you can have kind of co-leads. I mean, that happens not as frequently, but if you really love two lead firms equally as well, just put it out there. Like, I love both of you guys. I want you to both come in. That's rare.
Let's just do one final here. It wasn't a question so much as a comment, but I'm going to convert it into a question. Any advice for hustling if you're an introvert?
Yeah. It's actually, I like that question. Sometimes on that slide with Richard of Pied Piper, I go into more of that. As I kind of said on that, you have to channel your inner hustler, even if it doesn't come natural, right? And so for a lot of introverts, that can be draining, and you've got to kind of switch that flick that switch on, get out there and hustle and be dynamic. And then as soon as they're done pitching, they go back to their couch and just collapse because it took all the energy. So I don't know if that's necessarily a tip, but that's often what happens with introverts who got to go hustle. And I'd say kind of also what I said is like, treat it like a game, right? Treat this like a bit of a game. It's a challenge. It's going to be stressful because you're getting rejected a lot. You're going to get people who think your idea is dumb, and people will tell you that. But also use it as a way to get some intel. A lot of these investors are looking at a space, studying a space, talking to lots of companies in the space. Use it as an intel gathering for your own, even if they don't write you a check. Gather some intel on it. So it's the best I can offer. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Nathan, thank you for this. This was incredibly insightful. I really enjoyed just being an observer and an attendee on this. And for everyone who's watching, just so if you're not aware already, Nathan was a guest on the Startup Hypeman podcast recently. And if you could go and listen to that episode, it's a great compliment to what you've just seen in this webinar today. We are going to get the recording of this up on the Startup Hypeman YouTube page, and we'll send it out to you afterwards. And then Nathan, one more time, what were those promo codes for everyone if they want to check out Foundersuite?
Yes, it is Startup Hypeman monthly for 30% off a monthly, and Startup Hypeman annual for 40% off an annual plan. And those are capital S Startup, capital H for Hypeman, and capital M for monthly.
Cool. I'll put that in our follow-up email as well, just in case anyone doesn't have that offhand. And it'll be, if when you go back and watch the recording, it'll be on that slide as well. And seriously, everyone, take advantage of that offer, because I think there are too many founders who try and manage this entire thing out of an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Drive spreadsheet. And I promise you, whatever money you think you're saving by just doing it manually is costing you so much more in the mental headspace you lose trying to keep track of all that by yourself, and inevitably things falling through the cracks. So definitely take advantage of that and check out Foundersuite. And Nathan, we'll be talking soon. So thank you for coming on to the Hypeman stage.
All right, Sarah, thank you very much. That was fun. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.